It is the year 480 BC, and the great clash between the Carthaginians and the Sicilian Greek city-states has begun. A clash that will decide who will hold dominion over Sicily. Sicily, a land coveted by many and held by few. Over the years, many different peoples settled in Sicily, such as the Carthaginians and the Greeks. And because of the vast wealth of Sicily and its strategic location, many wars were fought for the island. One of them was known as the First Sicilian War. In the year 483 BC, Theron of Acragas took Himera from Tyrillus. Tyrillus, an ally and friend of Carthage, decided to sail south to request their aid. But Theron of Acragas was not alone, and he had his own allies. He was allied to Gelon of Syracuse, and they presented a united front against the Carthaginian interests and their allies, and they potentially could conquer all of Sicily. 3 years later, the Carthaginians amassed a mighty fleet that sailed to restore Tyrillus to power. At the same time, however, King Xerxes of the Achaemenid Empire started the invasion of Greece. The mainland Greeks had sent an embassy to Gelon requesting the aid against the invading Persians. Gelon at first complained that the Greeks spurred his request of aid against the Carthaginians in the past, but he offered to send 24,000 foot soldiers and 4,000 horsemen, and 200 warships in addition to fully provisioning the combined Greek force in Greece if he was made the supreme commander. The Spartans objected to this, and Gelon then decided and asked to be appointed as the commander of either the land or naval forces in exchange for his help. The Athenian envoy then objected, and the Greeks were sent packing empty-handed. Gelon also hedged his bets. He sent 3 ships under Cadmus of Kos to Delphi, with instructions to offer his submission to Xerxes in case of a Persian victory. Hamilcar, the commander of the Carthaginian fleet that sailed from Carthage, chose not to sail to Selinus and then attack Acragas, though it was the coast closest to Carthage. The Carthaginian fleet sailed to Panormus instead. Hamilcar chose this course because restoring Tyrillus was his primary objective. The conquest of Sicily, if that was a consideration, took second place to his duty as an ally of Tyrillus. En route to Sicily, however, the Carthaginian fleet was hit by storms, and they lost a significant number of their mounted troops and provisions. Arriving at Panormus, Hamilcar spent 3 days repairing his ships and organizing his troops. The Carthaginians then marched along the coast to Himera, with the fleet sailing alongside, and encamped near the city. Theron was already present in Himera. With his army, the Carthaginians erected 2 camps near Himera. The sea camp was set to the north of Himera, by the sea, surrounded by a palisade and a ditch. The other part of the Carthaginian army, or the majority of the Carthaginian army, was billeted in a separate camp to the south on the low hill west of Himera. Theron and his troops, however, weren't idle, so they sallied out of Himera hoping to take the Carthaginians by surprise, but instead they got drawn in a pitched battle and lost a large amount of manpower after prolonged combat. Then they retreated back to Himera. Losing control of the surrounding lands, and the Carthaginian troops foraged virtually unopposed. Theron knew he was screwed if he didn't get help, so he sent messages to Gelon, who arrived with his army and encamped across the river. Gelon, using his cavalry superiority, managed to capture and kill many of the foragers, and because Hamilcar lost most of his mounted troops in the storm, he could not respond effectively against Gelon's horsemen. The Carthaginian army probably numbered around 70 to 80,000 men. Most of the core units came from Africa. The heavy African infantry fought in close formation, the same style of hoplite warfare, armed with long spears and round shields, wearing helmets and linen cuirasses. The light Libyan infantry carried javelins and a small shield. in a variety of the peltas. The Iberian infantry wore leather headgear and fought in a dense infantry formations, armed with heavy javelins, long body shields, and short thrusting swords, almost identical to the later Roman hastati. They also had Sardinian and Gallic infantry that fought in their native gear, but often were equipped by Carthage. Whatever cavalry the Carthaginians had was destroyed. In the storm, having covered the Carthaginian army, we will now cover the Sicilian Greek army. Gello and Theron had a well-trained, battle-tested army at their disposal. In addition to citizens, hired mercenaries reinforced their forces. The Sicilian Greek army at Himera is said to have numbered probably around 35,000 to 40,000 foot and 5,000 horse. The main hoplite force came from the citizens of the Sicilian Greek cities. They were also reinforced by mercenary hoplites hired from Sicily and Italy, and even, some say, mainland Greece. Some of the citizens also served as peltists, while the wealthier citizens formed the cavalry units. Mercenaries also provided archers, slingers, and more cavalry. The actions of the Greek cavalry encountering Carthaginian foragers prompted Hamilcar to send a letter to Silenus, one of Carthage's allies in Sicily. He requested them to send their cavalry to Himera on a given date, that Hamilcar was to offer a sacrifice to Poseidon. But the letter en route to Silenus was intercepted by Gelon's men. Gelon, taking advantage of this opportunity, planned to use his own cavalry to impersonate the Seleucid reinforcements and infiltrate the Carthaginian camp, while his army attacked the land camp. Gelon's horsemen left their camp on the night before the appointed day, and at daybreak these horsemen arrived at the Carthaginian sea camp and were admitted into the camp. The disguised Greek horsemen killed Hamilcar while he was preparing the sacrifice, and then set fire to the beached ships, causing great confusion at the sea camp. The Carthaginian forces that were in the sea camp were in a rout and rushed to launch whatever ships they could save, and some of the ships were overcrowded with soldiers. At the same time, the Sicilian Greek army marched out of their camp. The Carthaginians in the southern camp spotted them and prepared for battle. The battle was fierce, and the Sicilian Greeks had a tough time of fighting the Carthaginians because the Carthaginians formed their battle lines uphill. After some time, however, the battle was turning in the favor of the Carthaginians, until they got news that Hamilcar was killed and their fleet was being destroyed. They lost heart and routed back to their camp. The Sicilian Greeks, not wanting to lose the initiative, pursued the fleeing Carthaginian troops. But when they attacked the camp, many of the Sicilian Greek troops started to loot the camp, thinking that the battle was won. That was a fatal mistake, and the Carthaginians rallied and counter-attacked the Sicilians. Greek troops desperately tried to reform their lines, but it was too late, and the Carthaginian counterattack was fierce and brutal. And for a time it looked like the Carthaginians could recover the battle and win, until Theron arrived with his soldiers from the east, and hammered the Carthaginians in their exposed flank. The Sicilian Greek army, seeing this, rallied and countercharged the Carthaginians, and the Carthaginians, under enormous pressure from front and rear, collapsed. Some of the troops were able to fall back and cut their way through Gelon's cavalry that was still ransacking the sea camp. They were able to board the remaining ships and flee. The majority of the Carthaginians weren't so lucky, and they fled to a hill inland, where they attempted to defend themselves. However, to the Carthaginians' dismay, the hill was waterless, and because of the lack of provisions, and because the Sicilian Greek troops decided not to attack such a strong position, they instead besieged the Carthaginian forces. Ultimately, the Carthaginian forces were forced to surrender. About half of the Carthaginian army and the majority of the fleet was destroyed. Numerous prisoners had fallen into Greek hands. It is said that the surviving Carthaginian ships were sunk in a storm on their return journey to Africa. Gaelon and Theron did not attack Rhegion or the Carthaginian territory in Sicily after the battle. Carthage initially manned the city walls and prepared for a Greek invasion of Africa, and did not renew the struggle either. Gaelon offered mild terms to the Carthaginian embassy that arrived asking for a ceasefire. Carthage paid 2,000 silver talents as indemnity, but lost no territory. The power shifted greatly into the hands of Theron and Gaelon, such that the Carthaginian allies Selinus and Rhegion also came to terms with Syracuse. For the next 70 years, there was largely peace between the Carthaginians and the Greeks. But because of major power shifts in the years to come, ultimately gave way to the Second